Let's go back. Imagine yourself 2nd century BC in Athens. Everything you need to know is communicated to you by in-person communication. The literacy rate was 1%. So you couldn't read anything that are provided to you because you needed somebody to read to you. So reading was a social event. You would go to the library and there are the librarians, and we're going to read this today. So that we're going to read some laws so that you know your rights, right? But you couldn't find that information anywhere else. So street life was essential. You couldn't live without it. Now let's move to 1960 Detroit or St. Louis. You know, we killed the mixed race neighborhoods, redlined. We said hustle and bustle of the street is not good for us. We killed that. And we segregated everything. We say living social life of the neighborhoods were blight. So we killed that too. And a big metropolitan area, you go to downtown, 6 p.m., it's dead. Nothing was happening. So we're going back from that now. And then 70s, 80s, 90s, we have a whole library of why that was wrong. Why we need to go back and have street life. And since then, we practitioners, planners, designers, architects, trying to put that back to our streets, which is a really big challenge. And we need to learn a lot from different cultures, places where they didn't go through our way of segregating and killing the street life. So this is that session. Thank you.
What is this place? Everyone knows. Many, if not all of you, have been there. What is it? I can't hear. Come on. This is City Walk. This is Disneyland. So is this street life? Is this authentic? Most new urbanists would say that it's not. This is a parody of street life. We travel there to have a little bit of street life where we feel safe and embraced by the Disney spirit. I would argue, though, however, that this is just as artificial and just as sterile. This is Trilith, famous community. I was there recently with the NTBA, and one of the things we kept hearing about in Trilith was how they were after grittiness. They wanted to be gritty. They wanted to really express the vibe of the people, and they had hired some famous graffiti artists to paint some graffiti, which was rather innocuous. It was decorative graffiti, and they hired some muralists to paint some very pretty murals. Indeed, they are murals all over Cincinnati and stuff. But where does the muralist movement come from? Of course, murals have been since antiquity, but where did the muralist movement come from, and what did it do? It actually comes from Mexico, doesn't it? The muralists were expressing revolution. This came during the Mexican Revolution. And what happened during the Mexican Revolution was there was 3 years in which there was no school, no education, and lots of kids came up. Then they had to work. They were poor and they were illiterate. And the muralists were actually sent out to every community in the nation to paint murals that were supposed to educate people about what the Mexican Revolution was about, what land reform was about, the injustice that had been committed. And if you go now to Mexico City and you tour the palace of the president and all, you will see some spectacular murals painted by the famous muralists of Mexico, including Diego Rivera. And they're all about revolution, communism, and they even have the Rockefellers there, being with syphilis and everything all decrepit. But it's a kind of a fun experience because a lot of our sacred cows are just decapitated right there in the presidential palace. So muralism is really something about grittiness in the sense it speaks to arms and fighting and injustices and the righting of wrongs. It is not decorative. They're quite beautiful, of course, but it's not a decorative thing. This is street life. Street life it's dirty, it's crowded, there are many things going on. It's complex, it can be frightening to some, but in general, it's also extremely safe. If you do visit Mexico and go to the cities like Mexico City, you will not experience what's in the news. You will not be afraid at all. because of the number of people that there are out in the street. You'll have really a sense of kind of safety. Because I'd say at least 8 out of 10 people are pretty good. So if there's 2 bad ones, you got 8 to watch your back. It's a nice experience if you're not afraid of dirt, of crowds, of noise, of things that here in the United States we actually dislike. How many families are like mixed families? One's Italian, the other's Swedish, Irish, or something from the Midwest. In the Italian family, they raise their voices, they give their hands, and it's really disturbing to the other partner, right? So we don't like color. We have rules. You can only have beige houses. Go to Cartagena, every color in the world is there. So street life is vibrant, and vibrant means colorful, loud, active. This is an example of street life. That street life you saw was in the downtown Cartagena. This is the most, sorry, not downtown Cartagena. That was in downtown Guadalajara. This is the most famous project in Guadalajara. This is Cayela, Guatemala. I'm sorry. I get my G's wrong. My wife is from Guadalajara, so she takes offense when I do this. But thank you. Guatemala. This is in Guatemala. It's Cayela. It's a beautiful architectural masterpiece. It's a terrific little city. Leon Krier is the architect, but it's very sterile. As you can see, there are no crowds. When we were there was a few foreign tourists. There were no crowds. There were very few actual Guatemalans there. When you contrast that to a city like Antigua, which is always packed, even on a Wednesday, a non-holiday, the streets are active, and there's a mix of people, very high-end and very low-end. Houses in Antigua are more expensive than they are in Cayela because it's such a beautiful city. But yet, poverty is in the street. Street vendors are selling you. You're getting approached. Carpets, shirts. I bought a shirt, right? I didn't wear it today, but I have one. It's quite a dynamic place, and that is street life. This is also street life, and this is quiet street life, not a tourist street. This is actually on the coast of Ecuador. And what you see there are, for example, a little house. This is mixed use. And the family has a store right next door. And that store is actually used. People actually buy stuff at that store because most of them would not want to take a taxi to go over to one of the Mega Maxi or the Walmarts of Ecuador. And so there is quite a bit of commerce because it's convenient. It's in walking distance. And people are promiscuous in the sense the inside of the house life happens outdoor too. And that's a lot of street life is just even privacy outdoors, people sleeping right outside the house. This is a fruit market in Medellin, Colombia. Medellin is one of the cleanest cities you will ever go to, but it's got a very vibrant street life. This is the city where famous Escobar, right? Drug lord Escobar was. The favela, or the poor neighborhoods, are now quite flamboyant with murals, and because you go over them in these carts, they go telesférico, which is the gondolas, like the ski lift type things that take you up into the mountains. Over top of the poor neighborhoods, all the terraces on the poor neighborhoods are painted in vibrant colors, and you get to look down and admire the work of the people. The lady there on your right is cooking in a makeshift kitchen. She's the wife of a fisherman. And the fishermen's wives have little restaurants where they take the cash of the day and they prepare you lunch. She's cooking, as you can tell, on a wood stove, literally made out of wood. And the fire's in there. I'm not sure how the stove doesn't burn, but there's lots of these like that there. This is completely improvised commerce. There are no permits. There's no health inspections. And you do occasionally get sick. But at the same time, these are hundreds of families living off the proceeds. And most of the time you don't get sick. And if you're there for a little while, your system adjusts and you no longer get sick at all. The fellow on your left is a cartonero. We have these in Buenos Aires, although I took this picture in Medellin. Cartoneros are these guys, carton is cardboard. And these guys, they're basically the recyclers. You put your recycling outside the door and in the morning it's gone. One of these guys has come and picked it up. And you know it goes to the recycling center because that's how he makes his living. All night long, he's picking stuff up. Morning, he carts it over to the recycling center. In the United States, we put it in this big, giant green barrel. Every 2 weeks, they pick it up. We have no idea where it goes. Does it go to the recycling center? Who does it benefit if there's any economic proceeds that come out of it? So this is the cartonero. This is street life. These are people that have commerce in the street and are able to survive because of it. This gal is at the bottom of an apartment building in Lake Atitlan. This is the first floor of an apartment building. She just set up her little kitchen there and now sells tortillas. We bought some tortillas. That's all. It's not really a restaurant. It's not taco. She just makes tortillas and people come and buy them. You don't buy the package. We bought 2. She was offended we only got 2, but I just wanted to try them. And she's got her little kid and people are coming up and down. And she does have a little refrigerator with some Cokes and stuff you can buy too. Now this is in Houston. This is my neighborhood. My neighborhood is slowly degentrifying. It's a white neighborhood that's slowly getting people like Martina and I living there and slowing up the place. And this is right around the corner from us. And these people sell quilts and linens and stuff out of their garage all the time. This is not during one of those community-wide garage sales. This is their way of making a living. And this is beginning to happen in our neighborhood. Now, there's some neighborhoods, and Abraham will address this, where it's happening every day, all the time, where this is now the commerce in the neighborhood. Our vision is like what's over to your right. This is the new urbanist front porch, right? It's very calm, it's very clean. You say hello to people on the street. But in street life, minority neighborhoods, it's like the Bronx. It's not the front porch, it's the stoop. And that's where everybody hangs, because typically the living spaces are too small for the whole family. All the kids, everybody, they all play on the stoop. You hang on the stoop. I've done it. I lived in Chicago, south side of Chicago. We used to sit on the stoop. Lived in New York, we sat on the stoop. That's another vision of that interaction with the street. It's not the front porch, it's the stoop. This is a Mexican concept, which just means like low-class stuff. This is very common now in East LA. In fact, this photo is one of James Rojas' from East LA, where people are just selling stuff on the street. They're just selling stuff. In fact, this is so common now in East LA that they don't even try to control it. They did for a while. They tried to control it, get rid of it, formalize it, put it in a special park where all the vendors could go. Because a lot of people that were driving around said, this is outrageous. How could people were selling clothing like this on the fence? They couldn't control it. First of all, nobody would go to the park to buy their clothing. But if they were walking by here, they may pick up a shirt. There's an aspect to street commerce which has to do with convenience. Say these people are on the street, they've got food, they've got boots, and they're having interactions, and they end up doing business. Small business. But you wouldn't necessarily go to buy a boot from this guy if he was in a mall. You wouldn't drive there. He's got to be convenient. It's got to be right there. It's got to be on the street for it to work. You'll see the chain link fences, and they have all the clothing hung on the chain link fences for sale. There are neighborhoods now in Los Angeles that are almost 100% that way. This is in Ecuador. When you stop to pay what you're doing constantly, you're paying like $1 and stuff for the toll booths. You stop at the toll booth, these guys just surround your car. Just swarm your car. You're afraid to move forward, but you don't run them over. They're like birds. You just keep going. They scatter. But what is it about these guys that allows them to do business there? They tried to formalize it in Ecuador. They tried to put these special places that were safe and you could just pull off and buy some mangoes. Nobody pulled off. Nobody wanted to pull off to get a mango from this guy. The only way you bought a mango from this guy is if he was standing by your car window and you were hungry or thirsty and he had water, or the other one has sunglasses and you needed sunglasses, you forgot your sunglasses, he's standing there at your window and they're Gucci and it's just $5 and you go, holy cow, and you buy the sunglasses. So street life and street commerce works on the street. It doesn't work when you put it in a mall or in a special park or in another location. This is in Turkey. We were in Turkey with Cork recently. The shops are very small and shallow. There's actually housing right behind it. And so the shops come out into the street. And it makes for a beautiful street facade. If you actually looked at the buildings behind all of those tapestries and flags and such, it would be a really junky, dumpy street. It looks gorgeous because of the street life. And the fellow on your left-hand side, he's doing the same thing that the cartonero does. He's your recycler. But he's European, so he's got like a motorcycle and stuff to bring the stuff around. And you know where this is? Did anybody read the New York Times today? The only surviving commerce in Gaza is the street commerce. When all else fails, that's what you got left. If you don't have it at all, you're screwed. What little food, clothing, medicine, water there is in Gaza is thanks to the street vendors right now. So it's a critical part of our survival and resilience is to allow it. This is in Mexico. They're selling all kinds of stuff. This is what a lot of Los Angeles started to look like when they tried to control it. And as I mentioned, it failed. And so they began to let it just happen without permits, nothing. You could now just sell stuff on the street in LA. They gave up. There's too many people were doing it. And what were they afraid of here? Crime. What was the crime? It was those Gucci sunglasses and Hermes purses and Chanel perfumes being sold for $2. But you know what? Nobody who can actually buy a $1,500 Hermes purse picks it up for $20 here. Nobody, they didn't lose a single client. And nobody that actually buys one here believes it's a real one. They know it's a fake. It's okay. It's not a big deal. It's not hurting Chanel not to sell a bottle of perfume, because the guys that buy that perfume, or their wives, and I've done this, actually go to Bloomingdale's and buy it. What do we do instead of this? These people, they eke out a meager living, and they have a meager housing situation too. These are the villas miserias in Buenos Aires. This is in Buenos Aires. We know it as the word favela, which is actually what they call it in Portugal, but everywhere they have a different name. Some places they call it invasión, an invasion, because these are all informal dwellings. They're all self-built. And it's just an area of the city where you got so many poor people that, like LA, you can't control it. You don't know what to do, so you just allow it to happen. And they build these little cities. Now, these little cities, they're quite dynamic. We live right next to one in Ecuador. We're looking at this picture from our side of the fence. We have a tall fence. It was like 5 meters tall, 15, 20 feet tall fence, barbed wire on top, electrified the whole bit, and we lived on the middle class side. We had guards protecting. However, every morning there was a little door through which all these people came in to do the construction, to do the cleaning, to sell stuff, everything in the neighborhood. They just had to be out by a certain time. We didn't really that way, so we were always on the other side of this wall. Martina was the brave one. She went through the little door, but the other way. And we made friends. Our first friends in Ecuador were on the other side of that wall. And there was shops and there was all kinds of things. And it was really not as miserable a life as you would think. And I would argue that it's a lot less miserable than this. This is what we do in the United States. Instead of allow this informal group of people that are trying to eke out a living to eke out their living, we do this. I don't want to leave you with the sad image. I'll leave you with a happy one. But in red on the board is my argument. The Universal Declaration of the Rights of the Street Vendors is actually in the Charter of the UN. Thank you very much. Abraham Zorrilla.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Abraham Zorrilla. I'm from City of Houston. I'm with the Planning and Development Department, and I'm with the Community Outreach and Regional Division. We're in charge of community outreach and engagement for diverse communities in Houston. And thank you for the opportunity of sharing my experience with street life in Peru. That's where I'm originally from. And I moved to the States in 1999 when I was 18 years old. And I'm going to share also another experience with street life living in the most diverse city of all street, which is Houston. All right, so let's talk about Peru. Growing up there, I didn't realize how street life is not common in other places. In Peru, there's a street market in every neighborhood. This is just a couple of examples. The picture on your is a street market from Iquitos. Iquitos is a city in the middle of the Amazon. The only way to get there is by boat or by airplane. Those are watermelons, and yeah, that's very common having this type of a street market in the neighborhood. The picture on your left is in Lima. That's an area called Gamarra. That's where they usually sell clothes. They started selling clothes on the street, and all of a sudden the houses and apartments started becoming stores. The cool thing about that, if you didn't know, Nike, Adidas, Lacoste, they have factories in Peru. They make clothes there. And somehow Peruvian people were smart enough to make the same clothes and look pretty much the same, it's just way cheaper. Lacoste, you can buy there in Camara for $5 instead of 40, 50 as it is here. And the picture at the bottom, that's Cusco. Cusco have two type of street markets. One for tourists, which is the one you're seeing, and the other one for local people, which is way cheaper. Now, Peru has more than 3,000 type of potatoes, and all of them get sold in the streets, believe it or not. So I heard when I moved here, people say potatoes are from Idaho. That's not true. The potatoes are from Peru. All right, so let's talk about Lima and the experience that I had. So that's a neighborhood called San Borja. And as you can see, my neighborhood, that was back in 1995, consists of parks. And the parks are basically around it is single family homes. The picture's an example of how the houses looked back then. On the north side, we have a corridor called Canada Avenue. That's where most of the businesses were located, restaurants, pharmacies, hotels. And on the south is our freeway, I guess, is Javier Prado. And this is like Madrid style when the highways or freeways are underground, so it's very walkable in that neighborhood, or in that area. And then we have Rosatoro, which, oh, look at this work. Okay. This street right here, it was just full of houses, and that's a picture back in 2013. But anyways, to make a long story short, what happened is that in one of those garages in 1995, one guy decided to sell ice cream that he made at his house. And it got very popular. People, myself, we were going there in summer and buying ice cream. But all of a sudden, the neighbors started doing that, and then they become stores. Every garage, it was a different store, and they start selling food. Papa rellena, empanadas, anticuchos. Now, if you don't know what I'm saying, then you need to go to a Peruvian restaurant, otherwise it's really good. But then between 1995 and 1998, you start seeing this type of businesses, restaurants. Now, that looks way better than what it was. That's, again, that picture for 2013. Google Maps didn't let me go anything important than that. But back in 1998, what happened is that the houses, just like the one in this picture, they just opened the garage and started putting tables in the front patio. And then they were doing so well that then the house became a restaurant. And then all of a sudden, all the street that you see here, all of them now is completely changed. Now, those restaurants right here are still the same. You can still see the house on top of those. But for me, it was very exciting. Back then, I didn't appreciate it as I do now as a planner. But nowadays, Peru is being awarded as the best culinary destination in the world in the last 10 years. And I truly believe that the reason being is because back in the 90s, people, the locals, residents, started appreciating our own food. And now when you go to Peru, this type of development is everywhere. The restaurants everywhere. So when we start appreciating our food, and with all the Peruvian people traveling around the world, we were able to make Peru a culinary destination for the entire world. And going back, now moving to Houston. So Houston, again, as I stated, is the most diverse city in the whole country. And I'm very proud of it. Diversity everywhere. Segregation is not quite common. There are areas that are segregated, but it's more organic. It's not something that people like to live together in certain areas. Anyway, so I was trying to find a place where I can show some type of street life in Houston. We have tons of street market, farmers market as well, but they're very organized. It doesn't have the Latin flavor to it. And I found this place, the Houston Flea Market, which is on the southwest area of Houston. And as you can see in the ethnicity map, that neighborhood consists of a lot of Hispanic people. Most of them are from Central America, but you can also see people from Africa and the Middle East. And so this location, compared to the other flea markets, is located on a local street. It's surrounded by apartment complexes. And then what happens is that those people living on those complexes basically are the people who go on the street expecting to be picked up for do construction works and kind of things. So when they walk on Windswent Street all over to Heathrow, and they go to the West Park Tollway, and that's where they hope to be picked up people for work. And what they do, the people from those apartment complexes took that opportunity to do businesses on the street. What they start doing is selling food. We're doing breakfast, lunch, and dinner. I passed by, and it was a Saturday morning. It was raining, so it wasn't as crowded as it normally is. But you see a lot of this type of commercials outside the streets, outside the apartments. And then people go there, the families from the apartment complexes are there cooking food for the people, and then the people, the families go there to eat. So it's a very welcoming environment. They play music. It's very exciting to see this in Houston. And if you notice, if you bring culture, the opportunity of space, and as well as an opportunity to make some money, then this is what happens. Now it was not only food, but people start selling toys, clothes. It seems like the flea market is going outside, it's not indoor anymore. And this is just a couple more pictures of that area, and that's the street that was happening. That's just for another view when you go from Hillgrove. And also I want to finish with adding that the people from other neighborhoods now, I'm going to that location, park in front of those tables and buy food there. It's like an organic drive-through now. Anyway, thank you for the opportunity. That's my contact information if you have any questions.
Good morning. I'm Kathleen. I create and recreate commercial districts now. That is the work that I do. But I used to run theater companies, and I didn't change careers. I am a strong believer that story is the spine of civilization. And Corkett talked about the Greek storytellers who were the educators. We think about the Shawnees of Ireland. We think about the griots of Africa. We have oftentimes forgotten about the minstrels, the troubadours, the jongleur, the king's fool or the holy fool, who were both the educators and the challengers in ancient society, especially the king's fool. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about the importance of story. And in this instance, and I can talk about story for, I don't know, a month and a half, but I've got about 15 minutes, so I'm going to talk a little bit about story on the street. And this is very important. And Fernando, Abraham, Corkett have talked about the spectrum of control on the non-control, the non-existent, or the loose control portion of the spectrum. We're Americans. We tend to move toward tight control. As we move toward tight control, we often lose some of that vivacity that you have just seen. It makes us more comfortable because, again, we're Americans, but it's not always the best choice. And the more we can keep our control in the middle of the band, in the loose control sector, the livelier our places are likely to be. There is always a story on the streets. And you need to think about, in your places, you need to think about what you want the story to be. Because if you aren't telling a story, somebody else is telling it for you. I could have put up here pictures of empty parking lots. That's a story. Fernando showed you a picture of a beautiful plaza that was empty. That's a story. These are the stories too. And the problem with these stories is people come to our streets primarily for two things. They come for delight, but they require a feeling of safety. And in our cities, these do not convey a feeling of safety. This is Covent Garden in England. It is the oldest busking community that I am aware of since 1662. In the 1980s, they wanted to revitalize Covent Garden. It had become very deteriorated. They had moved it, and it was not thriving. And one of the first things they did was bring back the buskers because it added liveliness to streets that were not especially lively at that point. And it added color and movement. It added story. It added a positive story, replacing a previously negative story. In the beginning, the buskers just came back. They just appeared and they were made welcome. Gradually, Covent Garden, they're English, organized it. They don't allow acoustic guitars or singer-songwriters. They don't allow any woodwind instruments of any kind. And they don't allow didgeridoos, which is an odd choice until you think that a didgeridoo is an ethnic instrument of Australia. And Australians, and I lived there for 10 years, Australians just love London. So an Australian busker might come accompanied by a didgeridoo, but they're not allowed to busk at Covent Garden. And they want you to know that they are unable to supply electricity. So all equipment must be battery powered. The Covent Garden buskers are now unionized. It's an interesting thing for a street performer, but they are unionized. Venice Beach. Venice Beach is not my favorite busking location because it's become, it's artificial authenticity now. It's overly cute in my view, but it does not really require much of you. You can't overlap with another spot. You can't block businesses, which is fair. And you can solicit money and tips via an open case. An open case is the international symbol of buskers. And I created a busking program in Cincinnati about 20 years ago, and we didn't have any at the time. And the buskers told me that they got very weary of people coming to them and saying, why don't you just work for a living? So I created a sign and gave it to every one of our performers that said, I am working for a living. Show your applause with dollars. Because busking is work. These people are making a living doing this. This is much like the street sellers that Fernando and Abraham and Corkin have talked about. This is their business. This is what they do. And if they're good at it, they're worth the money. If you can swallow a sword or eat fire, let me tell you something. I ran theater companies for 30 years. That takes some training. This guy, he can play a guitar while he's on skates. Can any of you do that? Asheville, other rules. Move on after 2 hours is an interesting rule. 2 hours is a long time to busk. Performance takes a lot of energy. Moving on after 2 hours is actually a very humane rule for the buskers, but it also keeps the street constantly changing. It's a new chapter in the story, and that's important. And if you will notice, they love a didgeridoo in Asheville. They're down with that. If you're any good as a performer, you can make a lot of money in 2 hours, and then you should probably get off the stage and take a rest. But again, these guys are working for a living. Decatur, you have to apply with a photo. You get a 1-month permit, which is renewable, and you can only busk in approved zones. Other rules down below, you don't allow portrait sketching. I love portrait sketching. I have a portrait that was sketched of me in Ecuador. I look a little like Abby Wambach, but I love it. It's hanging in my house. And they won't let you do fortune telling, tarot, or palm reading, which again, I think that's a silly rule. But hey, they do what they do. This guy sitting there, I love the idea that in Decatur, most of the busking is music. New Orleans, best busking I've ever seen anywhere in the world is in New Orleans. It's the least regulated, as far as I can tell. They do require a permit. To the point that they're working for a living, the average busker's pay is $19.48 an hour. They do have a code of etiquette. They've gone online. You can tip via Venmo, Cash App, PayPal, which I think is great. And Pro-Am means they have people who are professional buskers and they have people who just show up. I will say the best performance by a street performer I've ever seen was in New Orleans, and also the most authentic. He was working near French Market. He had a group of musicians. He was the compere. He was the master of ceremonies. He had about 200 people in a circle around him. He was African American, and he was a comedian. And if an insult is the great core value of many successful comedians. And he would say things like, come on, people, come on, step in, come on. I know you're all afraid of the big black men, but come on, step in, come on. We'll put on a show for you, but you got to get closer. And man, he worked the crowd like the professional that he was. Princess Leia there, I was in New Orleans just after Carrie Fisher died, and they organized a second line parade for Carrie Fisher. If you look just behind her, you can see Obi-Wan Kenobi there in the background. And that's informal busking. That's completely unregulated. I don't know how the second line parades in New Orleans are organized, but this was in Faubourg Marigny. They were starting there, and then they were going to march through the streets of New Orleans. And that's a story. And that's a story that everybody can connect to. My least favorite form of busking is probably the silent figures, but in Australia, I have a friend, a man named Mike Mullins, who is an artist, and Mike started his career by dressing as an Anzac, which is an Australian military figure, a legendary Australian soldier figure, And he wrapped his face in bandages so that he could not be seen. And he called his character No One. And he would just go stand on the streets as the lone Anzac with the invisible face of no one. And it was a political statement. And man, did it get commentary. And he did it for years. And he was run off, he was arrested, but the lone Anzac, the No One character, became celebrated. And it was a story about Australia's military heritage. In Australia, they all knew what No One stood for, and they all had a response. And it was a very effective form of performance. Tell a story on the street. Know the story you want to tell. Make it enlivening for the audience. Make it create a sense of safety and connectedness in place. And if possible, control it as little as you can.